So we got Josiah Brandt today. He's the founder of the Neville Goddard School of Imagination. Josiah Brandt develops and hosts online mentorship courses, weekend workshops, seminars, field trips, and retreats focused on igniting creativity, empowering the wisdom and beauty of the human imagination, and honoring the dignity of the human spirit. So Josiah, welcome to the Quantum Healing Collective. Feel free to just start off by sharing with us a little bit about your journey or whatever is flowing through you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, everyone, for having me. I'm excited to be here. And as I was kind of reflecting on this opportunity, I just had kind of a little inspiration of something I wanted to share with you all this morning. And my intention for this is that it's a little bit introspective reflection and a little bit motivational, go get 'em, type speech here. Kind of a hybrid between the two. So I'll start just by sharing a little story here. So I was at the dentist the other day, and I was having some work done, and I had the dental assistant, and then I also had she was training someone. So there's two people sitting over here, kind of working with me, and in between doing what they were doing, the dental assistant was making small talk with me, and at one point she asked, hey, so what is it that you do? And I love getting this question, especially being a metaphysical person, because it's always an adventure to answer this sort of question and find out where people are on these types of topics. And so I started off gentle, and I just said, yeah, well, I'm a teacher. And they're like, oh, that's really cool. What do you teach? And I go, oh boy, here we go. I said, I teach metaphysics. And she goes, oh, wow, that sounds really cool. I really don't know what that is. And I said, yeah, well, it's the nature of reality. It's kind of zooming way out and asking really big questions. And it's, wisdom of the ages. It's the questions that man has always asked and always will ask. And, it's not so much the answers that are important in metaphysics. It's the questions. And she said, oh yeah, that's really cool. And then the conversation kind of went to another place. And a couple minutes later, the person who was working with me got up and went over to go do something, and just the trainee was left. And in the little silence that lulled there, she kind of looked at me and she goes, so metaphysics, eh? And I said, yeah, have you ever? And she goes, only really late at night when I'm by myself and it's dark. that's when I think about metaphysical things. And I said, yeah, though that's really the time. That's really the time. For a lot of people, that's kind of when those little questions kind of sneak in, right? And in other places we would call that, kind of going into the silence, right? Kind of shutting the door, maybe going into the closet. A couple different ways to say that, but just kind of like shutting out, the noise of the world. And it's in the vacuum of the silence that some of these bigger questions tend to emerge. And I found that so interesting, that just to kind of get someone else's perspective on when these types of questions come up. And then I think about, the group that we have gathered today, and my suspicion, my inference here is that we don't necessarily wait until, the end of the day when it's dark and we're alone and it's late at night to think about these bigger questions, right? These in a lot of ways we've made these bigger questions our primary reason for being. I'll speak for myself. I know for me, these bigger questions have become my primary reason for being, and happily so. There's something, there's when you're on this metaphysical path, at a certain point, you start to just really be at peace with what the world might call cognitive dissonance, right? It's like there's a certain point in the journey where you start to realize, as I mentioned earlier, the questions are more important than the answers. And while it's nice to have answers, and our society loves answers, we love quick fixes, we love problem solution, kind of in this black and white 1 + 1 = 2 type arrangement. We love that. And when you're on a metaphysical path, and you start to realize that the questions are more important than the answers, one of the first steps down that path is starting to become okay with this idea of there aren't always 1 + 1 = 2 answers. And I think one of the things that, being a translator, a bridge builder is kind of how I view myself, being a bridge builder, right? As Kyle had mentioned, I'm the founder of a school of imagination, named after Neville Goddard, primarily because of the dogma-free approach to metaphysics that Neville Goddard taught. And I wanted to recognize, that approach, similar to your introduction, Randy, here, where you kind of read the mission statement over the meeting and said, look, this is kind of the flag that's going ahead of this meeting. Like, this is our approach to everything. And I wanted to offer that same kind of banner over my work at the School of Imagination, saying, look, this is dogma free. We're not going outside to find answers per se. We're learning to ask the questions from within. And as being a bridge builder to these concepts that a lot of people may find, kind of, ephemeral or etheric in nature, one of the things that I've really had to cultivate as a skill is kind of translating some of these ideas and making them easily accessible to a wide variety of people, a broad audience, some of them brand new to these ideas, just starting to uncover, the magical unseen world within. And then other people that have been on this path for a long time and are deepening their journey. And, in all of my courses, I really start in one place. And that's really what I'm going to share with you all today. I really start at one place, and I start by talking about the creative power of stories. The creative power of stories. Because, really the only difference between me and you, us and anybody else, a metaphysical person, if I can say it that way, and a more world of hardened form, hardened reality, 3D people. Really, the only difference is the stories that we're telling about who we are, about our place within the universe, both individually, and each of us also tells a collective story about humanity's place in the universe. We're telling a story about our story, about where we've come from, about where we perceive that we're going. And we tell a story about other people. We look out there, right? We look out there and we see a world of people, we see a society, we see a civilization that, I might add, sitting where we are in the timeline right now, is the loudest it's ever been. It's the loudest it's ever been. Each of us are exposed to more members of humanity with louder voices than ever before. It's a cacophony of voiced opinion that we swim in every single day, largely enabled by the internet. The collective of humanity is speaking to each other at a louder volume, more in more volume, meaning louder, and also more volume, meaning just more discourse, more conversation than really ever before, and certainly not in this way. And it's whenever we look out and we see this sea of voiced opinion, we tell stories about who those people are, about what we perceive to be true about them, about what we perceive to be true about their ways of looking at the world, about their ways of interrelating with the world. And what's interesting to me is that, really, when you think about it, I was tell a little story here. I was at a little get together yesterday with some work colleagues, and I was talking to a friend of mine who had recently retired. And I asked this older gentleman, I said, so you're retired. What do you fill your time with? Always fascinating to find out what people do when they can do anything. And he said, I've read about 20 times more books in the last year than I did in 20 years of my working career. And I said, wow, that's fascinating. You've really found something you love. And I said, what's your topic? And he said, oh, it's usually fiction. I was like, oh, you love burying yourself in stories. And I asked him a little later on, I said, have you ever, given your love for narrative, your love for storytelling, have you ever thought about maybe writing a story, maybe writing your own book? And he said, yeah, people say everybody's got a novel in them. And he's like, I'll tell you right now, there is no novel in me. Not that he can see, right? Not that he can see right now, perhaps, right? But I beg to differ. I believe that each and every single human being on the planet who is aware of being, right, who has consciousness, is telling stories. We're all storytellers. And what's kind of the subtle distinctions, the subtle nuance that I want to kind of surface for you all is as we think about this idea of everyone being storytellers, and about how really our mechanism of relating with the world is through the medium of stories. What I invite you to consider is that the stories that we tell can also represent a transfer of our power, a transfer of our power, right? So if you are familiar with quantum physics, just in general, this idea of observer, right? Observer observing a wave of probabilities, and through that observation, collapsing the wave of really what is infinite possibilities as mediated through probabilities into something that can be observed, a hardened fact or collapsed, particle, right? If you're familiar with that basic concept, it's easy to hold that concept at arm's length and kind of disembody the observer and say, oh yeah, it's something making an observation that causes reality to be observed, and then that's really what pulls something out of infinite possibilities and makes it something defined and viewable as real, right? Can make it a fact, right? But really, each and every one of us is an observer, and each and every one of us is reaching out into the field of all possibilities and calling things that are unseen as though they're seen, right? Each and every single one of us is reaching out into the field of all possibilities. Every story that we can possibly write about whatever we're observing with our senses, right? We could tell really any story, but we're choosing to tell a specific story. And when we do that, we're reaching out into the field of all possibilities, and we're selecting a single possibility, and we're making it true for us, right? And potentially others, if others believe us, the story that we're telling, but we're certainly making it true for us. And really, this faculty, this ability, this conscious awareness that is able to be that observer, to reach out into that field of possibilities, probabilities, and collapse it, that really is our creative power. That really is our creative power, which is one with the creative power of the universe. Right? There's no creative power out there. It's really here. It's right here in this point of presence, this point of power. And we use that creative power of the universe every time we tell a story. Every time we tell a story. And what's interesting about this is as you start to kind of feel into this idea of, oh, wow, I'm actually always telling a story. What's interesting about this is you start to realize pretty quickly as the concept kind of unfolds itself for you, you start to realize pretty quickly that that's really what consciousness is. That's really what consciousness is. At its very core, right? Consciousness is I am, right? And that's the name of God, I am. Right? Consciousness is I am, meaning a simple awareness of being. simple awareness of being, meaning all I'm aware of is I'm just right here and I'm right now. And maybe I have some sensory impressions, right? Like maybe I can see a camera in front of me. Maybe I can see a computer in front of me. Maybe I see, a light source and I see light bouncing off of some things in my periphery, right? And that's really the root of consciousness right there. Everything beyond that, the moment I start to say, oh, I'm speaking to a group of people, I'm telling a story, right? The moment I start to say this little object that I'm looking at right now is a camera, I'm now telling a story, right? Anytime I start to reflect upon this identity, this person that I claim myself to be, anytime I think about who Josiah is and everything conveyed by a name of the so-called history of this character, Josiah, right? I'm now telling this story. I've now left the ever perfect, ever endless present moment, and now I'm describing things, right? And that act of description is a creative act, because now I'm assigning meaning to whatever previously was just a field of possibilities. Now I'm assigning meaning, and that meaning that I'm assigning is my creative power in motion. It is my creative power in flow. Now, here's the interesting thing. The stories that I tell, being the creative power of the universe, stories that I tell have the power to place people, places, things into possibility, or to place people, places, things into limitation, right? Through my creative power of the universe that I flow through me, through my conscious awareness to the stories that I'm telling, I can place ideas in possibility outside of the box, right? Or I can corner them and kind of place them in a box, and I can place them in limitation, right? And what's interesting is that I can do this for things so-called outside of me, and I can also do this for things inside of me, for my own life, right? And when I tell a story that places myself in limitation, places myself in a box in some way, I can't do something because, or the way the world is right now, this probably isn't going to happen, right? Or there's so many examples, but anytime I go from possibility into limitation, effectively, what I've done is I've taken the creative power of the universe, I am, right? Taken the creative power of the universe, I am, and I've transferred that power to an illusion, right? To an illusion, to a story that I'm telling. And I'm now saying, oh, my life is governed by the dictate of this imaginary story that I'm telling, right? Because in truth, it is imaginary, because we understand that really all that actually is happening is the perfect endless present moment. And the moment I try to describe it or try to add meaning to it, right? Now that's a creative act. Now that's me flowing my creative power out into the world to either create limitation or to create possibilities, right? Now, the first place to start with this idea of the creative power of stories is introspective, right? Introspective and a little bit of reflection. The first place to start is to say, okay, what are the stories that I'm telling in my life? And it's very revealing to consider the stories that you tell to other people, right? So my little get together with people yesterday, when people get together and they hang out and they're socializing, what is everyone doing universally without exception? Telling stories. They're all telling stories. And what's really interesting is that the stories that you observe from others are direct revelation of the state that they're in, right? And again, starting with kind of introspective and reflecting inward, I would say watching yourself in those situations and being the observer of yourself, kind of stepping back and watching your character interacting in these social situations and observing the stories that your character is telling is very revealing of the state that you're in, right? That the stories that you're expressing and you're watching yourself express, they can place yourself in limitation or impossibility. They can place others in limitation or impossibility. And it's really interesting to observe how a lot of times we and I just mean this kind of generally and generically, we as social humans, right? A lot of times it is the reaction to the stories that we tell, right, that helps us to gain some sort of comprehension of who we are, right? The identities that we have. It's like, oh, when I tell this story, people respond this way. When I tell this story, people respond this way. And when you still have an outward oriented, outward facing view of reality, like, oh, reality's out there, right? And you're looking out here and you don't realize that out here is just mirrors. You think that out here is actually something separate and something out there from me that can somehow add meaning to my life, right? When you're still in that state of mind, a lot of times it's through the stories that we tell and then the ways that that is reflected back to us that we really start to learn who we are, right? And that's kind of like one of the first steps. So we start by becoming aware of the stories that we tell about ourselves, right? I know for me, one of my biggest breakthroughs in my life was when I had something happen that initially, the first story that I was telling about it was that it was tragic, right? It was tragic. It was a difficult circumstance, according to the story I was telling. It was going to be a limiting factor for my life, according to the story that I was telling. Right? It was an event that happened, and it was really badly timed from the story that I was telling, and very inconvenient from the story that I was telling, right? And what I realized a couple of days into this event having happened and feeling really sorry for myself and telling these stories of a very deep lack and limitation to others because I was in this state of feeling really sorry for myself, I had this little flash of insight. This is a number of years ago. Shortly before I really got going on this spiritual path. Kind of interesting how that works. And at some point, a couple of days into really feeling sorry for myself, I started to realize that if I continued to hold that attitude of this really messed up my life, this really messed me up, this really messed up, what I was trying to do, this is going to be a big problem for me. I realized if I continue to tell that story, I'm going to make it true. I'm going to make it true. So I was like, what if I flip the story the other way around? And what if I reclaim my power from this story? And what if I say, you know what, this event is as weird as it's going to sound on its face. What if this event is the best thing that's happened to me yet? What if it's a huge blessing that put on a costume of tragedy and came up and knocked on my door, right? And what if all I have to do is rip off that costume and see that it's actually this huge blessing, right? And so I had this idea. And I decided to take ownership of that story. I decided to change the story I was telling, and I started to take ownership of the new story. And on a very subtle, energetic level, what that did is that took my creative power that I had transferred to the mirror of the circumstance, right? To temporarily hold for me while I was figuring out my own problems, right? What that subtly did is that reached out and that pulled that creative power back, right? And it put me back squarely in my power. And I didn't understand that this was the dynamics at the time. I was very much in the dark at that particular point in multiple ways, right? I was going through a rough time, but I still made the decision to bring my power back. And I said, yeah, I am going to make this the best thing that's ever happened to me. And self-fulfilling prophecy, right? I now look back at that event and I can see so clearly how at that point in my life, it was the best thing that had happened to me yet, because I was going down a road that ultimately was not the direction I wanted to be going. And I didn't know that at the time. And the best way to get me from over here to on track to love and joy and happiness, health, wealth, and success squarely in my purpose, that was the best way to jump the tracks that the universe could have come up with at the time. Right? And by claiming that to be true, I made it true. Because again, creative power of the universe projected through my stories. right? So introspective reflection. I invite you to consider, what are the stories that you're telling? What are the stories that you're telling about yourself? And I suspect, I have this little bit of an intuition that really what our group needs to consider in this moment are the stories that we're telling about the earth, about the world at large. It's very easy, and I'm speaking from experience, it's very easy to feel like, well, I feel like I have a pretty good handle on who I am and what I'm doing. But when I look over there, those people don't really seem to know what's going on. And my invitation to all of us, myself included, sitting with this newly seated awareness of the power of our stories, is to consider how we can use the creative power of I am, the power of our stories, to place the people of Earth in our possibility. There's a lot of ways to look at this. There's a lot of tools for this. And it starts really subtly, very, very subtly. It's, these little transfers of power, either to limitation or to possibility. They can be very subtle. They can be very nuanced, so subtle that unless you're really paying attention, they can happen without you ever really noticing that's what's happening. And my invitation is that we reclaim awareness of the transfer of our power in that way, and that we actively seek out ways to place humanity, the earth, the world at large, into a place of possibility, to deeply consider the stories that we're telling. Now, one more thought here to consider here. Swimming in a sea of voiced opinion, right? The internet, just kind of, more of mankind speaking to each other than ever before in such a loud and prolific way. One of the things to consider is that there's a lot of people telling stories. There's a lot of people telling stories. And there's a lot of people telling stories without understanding that the story is the creative power. And if I start all of my courses by talking about the power of storytelling, stories that manifest, right? The second lesson in all of my courses is always mental diets. It's always mental diets. It's always, okay, I now understand that the stories that I tell are my creative power in action. I understand that the language that I choose, the words that I choose, I understand that that's magic. I understand that when I speak words over a situation, I understand that the whole universe vibrates in resonance with the words that are coming out of my mouth over a situation. And I speak and results appear, right? I understand that when I write, right, I'm spelling, and that word spelling, right, it's magic. It's my magic in action. It's the creative power of the universe in action when I'm choosing words to describe a situation, right? And that's not just true for me, that's true for everyone. So this idea of mental diets is saying, okay, well, if this is my garden, right? If my consciousness is my garden, and I understand that all of my speaking and all of my spelling and all of my magic and all of my stories and all of my creative power of the universe, right, is growing out of the seeds planted in my garden, right? And I'm either bearing fruit, right? Or I'm producing a lot of weeds that the wind is then picking up and blowing over into the garden, your gardens, right? The gardens all around me, right? Or I'm bearing beautiful fruit And then the pollinators are coming and grabbing that and carrying that over to the other gardens, and I'm spreading all this beautiful fruit, right? But it all comes down to this idea of mental diets. What am I allowing to be planted in my garden? The garden of God, the garden of my creative power. What am I allowing to be planted? And this becomes a tool for evaluating sources of media, right? It's like, before I place this in my garden, in my consciousness, right? Have you ever watched something or read something and then you go to sleep? It's like the last thing you do before you go to sleep, and then you instantly have a dream about that something. That's very revealing of the creative power of the media that we plant into our consciousness. The fact that we then blow it up into a story and we go and experience it, we live it in a dream state, right? When we become aware that this is what's going on, we have to evaluate everything. And we have to say, before I consume this news story, before I consume this content, this media, I have to evaluate, is this narrative placing the people of the world, myself and others, into a place of possibility? Or is it placing them into a place of limitation? This is how we change the world. It's through the stories we tell. Through the stories we tell, because we are the mediators of the creative power. The creative power flows through us, and we change the world through the stories that we tell.
Wow. Thank you so much, brother. That was absolutely incredible. I was wondering, are there any techniques that you use specifically to place the best seeds as possible in your garden? And then
Yes.
anybody that has questions, just feel free to raise your hand and we'll get to you after.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, so it's this constant checking in. It's constant. And, I think there is a place that can be achieved where it becomes automatic. But while you're in the process of cultivating this power, it's definitely this constant process of checking in. And it's always the number one technique. It's like, it's the oldest thing there is. It's this idea of the golden rule, right? It's, would I want someone to think of me, right? To place me into the position, whether, limitation or possibility. And obviously we always want to code for possibility, but would the person that I'm viewing or the story that I'm telling, right? Would I want someone to view me in that way, right? Would I want someone to put me in that box, right? Or would I want someone to put me in that possibility, right? How would I desire to be viewed? So it kind of starts there. This idea of, compassion, compassion, being able to, empathy, being able to kind of switch places in a minute and say, okay, if I were them, if the consciousness that I am was playing that character, right? How would that character want to be viewed, right? In the highest light. So that's a start. And then the other technique is really, it's about, very similar to this idea of nutrition, right? The better, higher vitality, higher energy, more beautiful, nutritious, whole foods and nutrition that we can put into our body, right? The better results about how our bodies work and how we interact with our bodies. So again, this idea of mental diets, I actively code for media, content, ideas that stretch me to think of even brighter, more beautiful possibilities, right? So it's a little bit, to kind of sum that up, it's a little bit of inspiration, finding great inspiration that kind of expands what I feel is possible about the world, kind of leaves me in awe about new possibilities. And then very much the golden rule, putting myself in that position and saying, well, how would I want to be thought of, based on what's going on.
Oh, thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions for Josiah? Oh, Uncle Randy. Go ahead, Uncle Randy.
That was great, Josiah. made me think, just like everyone else in the world, we've all had trauma and tragedy and so forth. And for the longest time, most of my life, I have focused on the tragedy early on. And of course, then that's just bad negative thoughts, and it doesn't help anyone. About 15 years ago, started focusing more on the silver lining from the tragedy. Realize, okay, I am much better off, and I am today much because of what happened, years ago. But I found myself too many times, I guess, the analytical side, going back to that tragedy and hanging on to it, not letting it go, and not focusing on the silver lining part of it enough. And it wasn't till just about a year and a half ago, I started thinking maybe I should focus on the journey in between, going from the tragedy on to ultimately where I realized the silver lining. There's a lot of learning, a lot of knowledge during the journey part of it. But occasionally still find that analytical thing is still going towards the tragedy. But you just answered that question, just now, right beforehand, and so I appreciate that. But I think if I stick to focusing on the journey and what I've learned from it, and will learn from everybody else along that path, then I can keep my mind focused on the good part, the silver lining, the knowledge, the growth, and the spiritual part.
For sure, yeah. And I'd also like to offer, in my classes where we start with storytelling, I offer kind of a 3-step template for how to tell what I call a conscious story, right? And the idea of a conscious story is there's kind of 3 elements to it, and the intent behind this is to not only recognize possibility, but also to call out the transformation that occurred in the story itself, right? Which inspires those who are hearing the story to think of new possibilities for their own stories. Okay, so the three steps is, 1, when you're telling conscious story, 1 is what actually happened, and this is you just the facts, right? Like, with minimal interpretation, minimal applying of meaning. The first step is just, okay, this is what happened, right? I was driving at night and there was a car accident, right? That's it. No meaning. No, it was this fault. It was not this fault. Or I was thinking this, thinking that. That's all meaning, right? Just, I was driving at night and there's a car accident, right? Step 2, the meaning that you first applied to the story, right? At first, I thought, man, this has really messed up my life. I'm not going to be able to work. I'm not going to be able to, middle of moving houses, I'm not going to be able to move, right? I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm not going to be able to do that. And I really thought this is going to be a huge tragedy in my life, right? That's what I thought at the time. And then step 3, the meaning I've now chosen to apply now that I'm back in my power, right? So this is what happened. At first, I made it mean this. I made it mean this, right? And now I've come to understand that it actually means this. I've now made it mean this is the best thing that had happened to me up until that point, right? So that kind of this 3-step process of taking the story, acknowledging, being authentic, and saying that, you didn't instantly see the silver lining. At first you saw tragedy, right? And then when the story fully evolved and you reclaimed your power regarding that story, that's when you saw the possibility. Now, when you tell a conscious story like that, it's not only placing you in your power, it is also being authentic to your own journey. And when you share your process, your journey of becoming empowered regarding that trauma, you're also enabling everyone around you to benefit from that full arc of evolution, right? Because you're being authentic about it. You're saying, look, at first I thought I was screwed. And then I started to see that there was another way to look at this, right? And that helps everyone who's ever had trauma begin to reclaim their power over their story. And it's a very subtle way to kind of plant seeds of light and seeds of possibility in the lives of everyone who will ever hear our stories.
Awesome.
Yes,
Thank
Eve.
you. I see Eve with a hand up.
First, I really appreciate today. I've been a Neville fan, so to speak, since probably 1999 or 2000. You could see from the gray hair that I'm old. But at any rate, while you were speaking, and I don't know if it's a question or just my thoughts roaming, I was thinking of back to Genesis, where the Lord, which I'll translate as law, gave Adam the power to name a thing. And whatever his name was, if you take the etymology of the word name, it means nature. And whatever he named was its nature. And this is what we do. Whatever we name is the nature of the event. It's the nature of me. It's the nature of this meeting. If we realize consciously that we have that same power, it wasn't just given to Adam in the garden from the law. It was given to all of us. And we just need to be aware that if we name it, it is. My thoughts.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Eve.
Thank you. Thank you. All.
Thank you, Eve. I see Leah with a hand up. Go ahead.
First of all, thank you so much for all of that. I also love Neville Goddard, and I have a lot of information around the topic that I'm going to ask about, but I just feel like you might have something to contribute to this. So my question is about the nuance of handling desire versus acceptance. So I think I'm really good at doing this with most things, with enjoying the journey. But sometimes with the thing that you really want, your desire can almost be painful. And so I would like to hear your thoughts on just riding that line and acceptance versus really feeling so lit up by a desire that it causes you pain.
I appreciate that question, Leah. And as you said, you already have a lot of information about it. So maybe a little contribution here. I'm just going to say what I intuitively feel is important to say in this moment, because there's a lot of things I could say about this, but I'm going to roll with my intuition. I'm going to say that in this situation, feeling a desire this powerfully, you can look at the etymology of the word desire, right? And I'm just going to kind of roughly sum it up as being de, meaning of, and sire, meaning the father, right? So if it's a true desire, it's of a higher order than our local ego, right? It's something larger than us desiring to express through us. And I would say in this situation, with the information you've just provided about your experience, I would say that really what's going on is you're being told to prepare. You're being told to prepare for it. It's on its way to you. And this is like seeing the future, right? That feeling where it lights you up so much, where you're like, it's borderline painful because you can feel it so intensely. That's the prophecy, right? Desire is the prophecy. It's coming. And this is all about you preparing for it. It's not about looking at it thinking, oh, when. No, it's okay. I'm having a premonition right now. It's coming. What can I do to prepare? I've got the early heads up. It's like, to use an analogy here for what's going on right here in this present moment, the wind is blowing, the rain is pouring down my house right now. And I knew this was coming because I got a heads up. It wasn't my desire per se, but I did get a heads up yesterday, right? So we have technology that can give us that. And I went ahead and I cleared my porch. I took my hanging plants down. I removed the bird feeder, anything that can blow around or potentially be damaged. I prepared ahead of time because I knew that this was coming. And in your situation, what you're feeling so physically, as you've described, that's your heads up, right? You didn't get it on the Weather Channel. You're getting it internally saying, hey, this is coming. Prepare for it. So my invitation to you would be, look at your life. How can you create space for the arrival of this? Because it's coming and it's going to need space.
Thank you so much. I think that's exactly what I needed to hear.
Beautiful.
That was
Thank you.
Was
Leah.
I don't know if I was muted the whole time when I thought I was talking. Was I?
No.
You heard it. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. Does anyone else have any questions? That was fantastic. I was just hoping to ask you how we can support you. I know you have your school. Is there any other ways we can, if anyone can get in touch with you or just be supportive to you on your journey?
Yeah, if you're interested in more information about my work or what I'm doing, I do have a website for the school. It's schoolofi.org. And I have classes that I do through there, video classes, and I also teach live classes. And next big phase of my journey is retreats and workshops. And that kind of, I've been teaching in one capacity or another for 20 years now. And it's really only been the metaphysical phase that has been online. Really, my core competency is in person. And I'm so very much looking forward to traveling and meeting the people of this movement and bringing them together. And it's in a similar vision to yours, I'm sure, Kyle, kind of this vision for a united collective humanity and our possibility. So yeah, if traveling somewhere and having a workshop or a retreat of some sort might interest you, come check out my website. You can join a mailing list. They send out information about what I've got planned. And I hope at some point to meet some of you all in person. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, we would definitely love that. And I'm sure Kristen would love to have you at Quantum and CConc to teach something, so we could set that up and get to meet you in real life. That'd be amazing. Cool. So what we do is we close with a prayer. So if everyone could just close your eyes. We dedicate the merit of this meeting to all of those awakening at this precious time. May our efforts to better ourselves help shift the planetary consciousness from fear into love. May this energy ripple out into the world and awaken those with closed hearts, illuminate closed minds, and inspire all to live within the presence of compassion and generosity. So thank you so much, Josiah. I look forward to reaching out to you, connecting, maybe linking up in real life. It'd be awesome.
Very good. Thank you all for having me. It's been an honor.